For 11 years, they told us one simple lie. Stay loyal until the company is sold and the people who built it would finally share the reward. The day the biggest deal in our company's history closed, the executives became millionaires, and the rest of us discovered that every promise we'd trusted had vanished into carefully chosen words. 11 years. That's how long I worked at Brightstone Technologies. Long enough to survive 3 rounds of layoffs, train employees who eventually became my managers, and turn down more job offers than I can remember. People sometimes ask why I stayed. The answer is simple. Because every year, leadership gave us one more reason to believe that staying until the very end would matter. It wasn't just motivational speeches. It wasn't just optimism. It was something the company itself kept referring to as the Employee Success Participation Program. The program appeared in annual presentations, company-wide emails, leadership updates, and town hall meetings whenever someone asked what employees would receive if the company was eventually acquired. No one ever discussed exact numbers. No one promised a specific percentage. Whenever employees asked for details, HR always gave the same answer. The eligibility criteria and distribution structure will be shared once a transaction is finalized. It sounded reasonable. After all, acquisitions involve confidential negotiations. Most of us assumed the legal details simply couldn't be disclosed until the deal was complete. Nobody imagined the real surprise would have nothing to do with confidentiality. Every year, our CEO reinforced the same message. When this company is sold, the people who helped build it will share in its success. He never sounded like someone making an empty promise. He sounded like someone reminding us of a plan already in motion. That mattered, because staying wasn't always easy. Raises were modest, bonuses were smaller than friends at other companies received. When departments were eliminated, the remaining employees quietly absorbed the extra work, while leadership thanked us for our commitment. Their explanation never changed. We're building long-term value. The closer we get to a transaction, the more important retention becomes. The people who stay with us will understand why it was worth it. Over time, those words shaped real decisions, mine included. About 3 years before everything changed, a recruiter from one of our competitors contacted me. The offer was incredible. 30% more pay, a generous signing bonus, better retirement benefits, flexible remote work. I seriously considered it. That evening, I printed the offer letter and spread it across my kitchen table. My husband looked at the salary and laughed. "I think they're trying pretty hard to steal you." "They are. So what's stopping you?" I looked at the papers for a long moment. Then I answered honestly. "If the company sells next year, I'll lose eligibility." He frowned. "You really think that program is worth walking away from this?" "I don't know exactly what it's worth," I admitted, "but leadership has been talking about it for years. HR keeps saying the details will come when the transaction closes." He nodded slowly. "I guess you've already earned it." That's exactly how I felt. Not lucky, not entitled, earned. Apparently, hundreds of other employees felt the same way. People stayed through exhausting product launches. They postponed career moves. Some rejected higher-paying offers. Others delayed retirement because they believed they were approaching the finish line. Inside the office, we joked about it. "Just make it to the sale." That became our unofficial motto. Then, one Tuesday morning, every employee received the same calendar invitation. Mandatory company-wide meeting. No agenda, no explanation. The atmosphere changed instantly. Slack channels exploded with speculation. People gathered near conference rooms instead of working. Someone from finance walked past with a smile he couldn't hide. "I've got a feeling today's the day," one coworker whispered. At 11 o'clock, the live stream began. Our CEO appeared on the giant screen. For once, even he seemed emotional. "I'm proud to announce that Brightstone Technologies has signed a definitive agreement to be acquired." The room fell silent for a fraction of a second. Then everyone erupted. People stood and applauded, some hugged, others wiped away tears. It wasn't just because the company had been sold. It was because, after years of hearing the same message, we believed we'd finally reached the moment we'd all been waiting for. The CEO smiled as the applause settled. "I want to thank every employee who stayed with us through the difficult years." He paused. Then he said the sentence that filled the room with even louder applause. "You earned this success." I texted my husband before the meeting had even ended. It finally happened. He replied almost immediately. "Looks like staying was the right decision after all." For the first time in years, the entire office felt lighter. People talked about paying off mortgages, helping their parents, starting college funds, taking vacations they'd postponed for years. Nobody expected to become millionaires. We simply expected the company to honor what it had been telling us for years. 3 days later, an email arrived. "Employee Success Participation Program, Final Distribution." I smiled the moment I read the subject line. Finally! I opened the attachment. The first page explained that distributions had been approved as part of the acquisition. Then I reached the eligibility section. Eligible participants: Chief Executive Officer, Executive Leadership Team, Vice Presidents, selected strategic officers designated by the Compensation Committee. I kept reading. Surely there had to be another section. There wasn't. I searched the document for the word employee. Nothing. I searched for my department. Nothing. I searched for my own name. Nothing. The program was real. It had always been real. It just had nothing to do with the people who had spent years believing they were part of it. 3 days earlier, our CEO had stood on stage, looked directly at us, and said, "You earned this success." As I stared at the screen, one question kept repeating in my head. If we were never meant to receive anything, why had they spent years making sure we believed we would? Don't miss the next chapter. The conversation with HR answered that question and somehow made the betrayal even worse. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same document. Employee Success Participation Program, Final Distribution. The program had been real all along, just not for us. By the next morning, the office felt completely different. Only 3 days earlier, people had been laughing in the break room, talking about paying off mortgages, taking their kids to Disney World, and finally replacing cars that had been held together with duct tape and hope. Now, nobody was talking. You could hear keyboards, printers, coffee machines, but conversations had almost disappeared. It was as if an entire building had realized, at exactly the same moment, that something wasn't right. Around 10 that morning, I printed the distribution document and walked to HR. The representative greeted me politely. "Good morning. What can I help you with?" I placed the document on her desk. "I think there's been a mistake." She reviewed the first page, typed my employee ID into her computer, and looked back at me. "There isn't a mistake." I blinked. "I've worked here for 11 years. "I understand. I've stayed through every restructuring." She nodded. "I can see that. I trained people who are now directors." I appreciate your contribution. I waited. Nothing came. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. So, why wasn't I included? She paused for a moment before answering. Eligibility for the participation program was determined prior to the transaction. I frowned. But everyone was told employees who stayed through the acquisition would share in its success. The company communicated its appreciation for employee contributions throughout the process. That's not what I'm asking. She remained perfectly calm. I understand your concern. No, I said quietly, you don't. I pointed to the document. For years we were told this program existed. Yes. We were told details would be released after the acquisition closed. The eligibility information remained confidential until closing. I stared at her. So ordinary employees were never eligible? She didn't answer. Instead, she gave the kind of response every corporate employee recognizes immediately. I'm not authorized to discuss how eligibility decisions were made. That sentence told me everything she wasn't willing to say. I thanked her, picked up my papers, and walked out. By the time I reached my desk, my phone buzzed. Mark, product development. Did you get anything? I replied with one word. No. His answer came seconds later. Same. Then another message appeared. Sarah got nothing. Another. Engineering got nothing. Within an hour, our private employee chat had exploded. Sales, customer support, marketing, finance, operations. People kept asking exactly the same question. Did anyone outside executive leadership receive a payout? Answer after answer appeared. No, nothing, zero. Someone finally typed what everyone else was thinking. Has anyone below vice president received anything? Nobody answered. Not because they didn't want to, because apparently nobody could. Then someone uploaded a screenshot from a town hall held 4 years earlier. There was our CEO, standing on stage beneath enormous blue letters, building success together. His quote had been highlighted beneath the photograph. The people who help build this company will share in its success when the transaction is complete. Another employee uploaded a leadership presentation from 2 years later. One slide was titled, Employee Success Participation Program. Beneath it was a single sentence. Additional details will be shared closer to transaction closing. No eligibility requirements, no exclusions, no explanation. Then another employee found an email from HR. The subject line read, Retention Update. Inside was a familiar sentence. Questions regarding the participation program will be addressed once the transaction has been finalized. My screen kept filling with old documents. Emails, presentation slides, screenshots, town hall recordings, different years, different executives, exactly the same message. Stay. The details will come later. Then the story started. I turned down a position at Microsoft. I rejected an offer worth almost $40,000 more. I delayed retirement. I moved my family because I thought we were close. I stayed because they kept telling us to. Reading those messages hurt more than discovering I wasn't eligible, because I realized I wasn't the exception. I was the majority. Late that afternoon, someone added a new person to the chat. It was Daniel, a former director who had left the company almost 2 years earlier. He read through the conversation for several minutes before writing his first message. Don't delete anything. Everyone immediately started asking questions. What do you mean? Did you know about this? Is something illegal going on? Daniel didn't answer any of them. A minute later, he wrote one more message. Save every email, every presentation, every town hall recording. If the same message was repeated year after year, someone will eventually want to see it. That was it. He logged off. The chat became strangely quiet. For the first time since the acquisition, nobody was talking about bonuses anymore. People were talking about evidence. That evening, I opened my archive mailbox. Thousands of old emails stretched back more than a decade. I started searching. Participation, transaction, success, retention. One by one, old messages appeared. Near midnight, I opened an email from 5 years earlier. I had completely forgotten about it. It had been sent to every employee in the company. The sender was our CEO. Near the bottom, one paragraph had been highlighted in blue. Thank you for continuing this journey with us. Your commitment today will be recognized when this transaction is complete. I read it again. Then I looked at the distribution document lying beside my keyboard, then back at the email. This hadn't been sent to executives. It hadn't been sent only to eligible participants. It had been sent to every single one of us. And for the first time since the acquisition, I stopped asking whether we'd been treated unfairly. I started asking whether we'd been deliberately led to believe something that had never been true. Don't miss the next chapter. The first conversation with an attorney revealed why those old emails could matter far more than any of us realized. Have you ever stayed at a job because you believed management's promises? Tell us your story in the comments. And if you want more true-to-life workplace stories like this one, subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. By Tuesday morning, nobody was talking about the acquisition anymore. They were talking about the payout, or more accurately, the lack of one. The office still looked the same. The coffee machines still hummed. Meetings still appeared on everyone's calendars. Executives still walked through the hallways wearing confident smiles. But something had changed. People had stopped trusting what they were seeing. Around 9 that morning, someone posted a simple question in our company Slack. Did anyone below vice president actually receive a payout? The replies started immediately. No, nothing here. 0. Same. Within 5 minutes, more than 70 employees had joined the conversation. Then, the entire thread disappeared. No explanation, no announcement, just gone. People stared at their screens. Did you guys see that? I thought my computer froze. They deleted it. Someone created another discussion in a different channel. This time, it lasted less than 2 minutes. Then it vanished too. By lunchtime, employees had stopped asking questions in company channels altogether. Instead, personal phones started buzzing across the building. Signal, WhatsApp, private text messages. If the company wanted the conversation off its network, that's exactly where it went. Around 2 o'clock, my phone vibrated. It was Mark. Don't use your work email. Meet me after work. No explanation, just an address. That evening, 8 of us met inside the back room of a neighborhood coffee shop. Nobody ordered much. Nobody was there for coffee. Mark placed an old presentation on the table. I downloaded this 3 years ago. Across the top of the first slide were the words, Employee Success Participation Program. He flipped to another page. There it was again. Employees who remain with the company through a successful transaction will have the opportunity to participate in the value they helped create. Sarah opened her laptop. I found something too. She played a recording from an old town hall meeting. The CEO stood on stage smiling, exactly the way we all remembered. Your commitment today will be recognized when this journey reaches its finish line. Someone quietly muttered, I remember clapping after that. Nobody smiled. The next hour felt like assembling a giant puzzle. One employee had old newsletters. Another had archived presentations. Someone else had recorded nearly every annual town hall because they liked taking notes. Different years, different executives, different audiences. The same message: stay, keep believing. The transaction will reward the people who helped build this company. Then something strange happened. Emily walked into the cafe almost out of breath. You guys need to see this. She opened her laptop. This morning, I logged into the employee portal to download one of the presentations. And it was gone. What do you mean gone? They redesigned the acquisition page. She refreshed the screen. The page looked completely different. The presentations we've been referencing for years had disappeared. So they deleted everything? I don't know. Maybe it's just part of the transition. Maybe it was. Corporate acquisitions often changed internal systems. Old pages disappeared, documents moved, permissions changed. There could have been a perfectly ordinary explanation. But sitting in that room, only days after discovering we'd been excluded from the program we'd heard about for years, it didn't feel ordinary. It felt like time was running out. Everyone began searching their laptops, external hard drives, old USB sticks, personal email backups. One by one, forgotten files resurfaced. Found another one. I've got a recording from 2020. Here's an HR newsletter. I still have the PDF from the Leadership Summit. Every discovery made the picture clearer. No document explicitly promised money. None of them said every employee was guaranteed a payment. But together, they painted exactly the same picture. Stay with us. You'll be part of what comes next. Around 7 o'clock, Daniel walked into the cafe, the former director. He looked around the room at the stacks of papers covering every table. I figured this was happening. Nobody wasted time. Questions flew from every direction. Did leadership know? Were we ever eligible? Was this planned? He raised one hand. Stop. The room went silent. You're asking the wrong question. Nobody spoke. He looked down at the documents scattered across the table. Forget what they told you. His finger rested on one of the printed emails. Find out what they were telling each other. A chill ran through the room, because none of us had thought about that. We'd spent days proving what we'd heard. We hadn't once asked what executives were saying behind closed doors. 2 days later, 15 of us sat inside the conference room of an employment law firm. Boxes of documents covered one side of the table. The attorney didn't interrupt us. He simply read. Email after email, presentation after presentation, town hall transcripts. Nearly 40 minutes passed before he spoke. Interesting. That was all he said. He kept reading. Finally, he closed the last folder. You're all focused on what was communicated publicly. We nodded. He leaned back in his chair. I'm interested in what was communicated privately. The room became completely silent. Someone finally asked, "What do you mean?" He folded his hands. If executives honestly believed employees understood this program was limited, He paused. Their internal discussions should reflect that. Nobody moved. But, he continued, if their internal emails show they knew employees believed something entirely different, he looked around the room. Then we're no longer talking about disappointed expectations. Another long silence. Then he said the sentence none of us expected. I think it's time to ask a judge to let us see their emails. For weeks, we've been searching through our own inboxes. Soon, someone would be searching through theirs. The lawsuit moved faster than any of us expected. Within weeks, our attorneys filed a request requiring the company to preserve and produce internal communications related to the Employee Success Participation Program. For the first time, the story was no longer about what employees had heard. It was about what executives had been saying when no employees were in the room. Months passed. Then, one Friday afternoon, our attorney called. I think you should come in. When we arrived, several thick binders were waiting on the conference table. He didn't start with a speech. He simply opened one folder. The court ordered the company to produce thousands of internal emails. The room fell silent. He slid the first document across the table. It was an email between two senior executives, sent nearly 3 years before the acquisition. One sentence had been highlighted. We cannot release eligibility details before closing. That didn't surprise anyone. Then he turned the page. The next email did. If employees discover that the program is limited to executive leadership, retention could become a serious issue before the transaction is complete. Nobody spoke. For years, we'd wondered whether leadership understood how employees interpreted those promises. Now we had our answer. They did. Another email appeared. Continue using the approved messaging from the town halls. Do not discuss participant categories until after closing. Then another. Questions regarding eligibility should be redirected to HR using the standard response. We all recognize that response. Details will be shared when the transaction closes. I'd heard those exact words more times than I could count. The attorney finally broke the silence. These emails don't prove anyone promised you a specific payment. He looked around the room. But they strongly suggest leadership knew employees believed they were eligible and intentionally chose not to correct that belief before the sale. That changed everything. The company's legal team suddenly requested settlement discussions. At first, they insisted the emails had been misunderstood. Then they argued they had been taken out of context. But the documents spoke for themselves. And there was another problem. Court filings are public. If the case continued, those emails would become public too. Our attorney leaned forward. For the first time since we met, he said, I don't think they're worried about losing in court. He paused. I think they're worried about everyone else finding out what they wrote. For the first time in months, it felt like the balance of power had finally shifted. Settlement negotiations lasted for weeks. We weren't allowed to discuss the details while they were happening. Every few days, our attorney would call. They've increased the offer. Then, they're asking for stricter confidentiality. Then, they're willing to expand the group of employees included. Each conversation meant one thing. The company was no longer fighting as confidently as it had at the beginning. One rainy Thursday morning, we gathered in the same conference room where we'd first seen the internal emails. Our attorney walked in carrying a single folder. He smiled before saying a word. We have an agreement. For a moment, nobody reacted. It was almost impossible to believe the fight was actually over. Then Sarah covered her face with both hands and started crying. Not quietly, not politely. The kind of crying that comes after carrying the same weight for far too long. Mark let out a laugh. Not because anything was funny, because after months of wondering whether we'd imagined everything, we finally knew we hadn't. One by one, people hugged each other. Some smiled, some cried, some simply sat in silence, staring at the table. The settlement included financial compensation for the employees who had joined the case. No, it wasn't enough to replace 11 years of trust. Nothing could do that. But the agreement meant something far more important. The company had chosen to settle instead of asking a jury to hear the evidence. In the weeks that followed, news of the lawsuit spread through the industry. People weren't shocked that executives received larger payouts. They were shocked by the internal emails. The emails that showed leadership understood exactly what employees believed and chose not to correct them until the sale was complete. The company announced changes to its leadership team. Future incentive programs would include written eligibility requirements from the beginning. It was the kind of policy that should never have been missing in the first place. As for us, most of us never returned. Some started new jobs, some started businesses. A few finally accepted the offers they'd turned down years earlier. The strange thing was, none of us talked very much about the money. Whenever we met, we talked about something else. The day we stopped blaming ourselves. For months, we'd wondered whether we'd misunderstood, whether we'd been naive, whether we'd heard only what we wanted to hear. The discovery process answered those questions forever. We hadn't imagined the expectation. The people running the company knew it existed. That truth mattered more than any settlement check ever could. Looking back now, I don't remember the exact amount I received. I remember something else. For 11 years, they asked us for loyalty. In the end, the most valuable thing we walked away with wasn't the money. It was proof that loyalty should never depend on promises that someone refuses to put in writing. The settlement closed the case, but it also closed a chapter of our lives that had lasted far longer than it ever should have. And that was worth more than any title, any bonus, or any promise ever could have been.